for legal tech, now you have AI kind of layered into it. It's gonna save even more time, and hopefully also will save more money and save more costs, which uh, there's definitely a lot of fear and concern about AI. How's it gonna affect headcount? And my general thesis is that it's augmenting. Um, there's got to be a human in the loop.
Hi, everyone. This is Akshay Verma, COO at SpotDraft, and now the host of our podcast, Beacon Voices. Really excited today to have a great conversation with Sachin Bansal, who is the former president and been in a long time operator role at Security Scorecards, a very, very seasoned cybersecurity operator. Excited to hear about his journey, talk a little bit, probably about cyber risk and how that applies to lawyers, talk a little bit about how lawyers and operators work together or don't. We might get a little spicy in that one too, and see where that unfolds. Sachin, really nice to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, Akshay, thank you so much to SpotDraft and to you for having me as a guest on the podcast today. I'm really excited about the conversation and hopefully giving the listeners here some useful takeaways.
Awesome. Look, let's hear a little bit about what you're currently doing. You've had an illustrious career over the years. I want to dig in a little bit into the history, but what's currently on your plate?
Sure. So I was most recently the president of Security Scorecard, a cybersecurity SaaS business backed by Google, Sequoia, and Riverwood Capital. I was in the business for about 6 years in progressively more senior roles. Initially, actually, as the GC of the company, and then over the last few months, I've been operating my own advisory firm that works a lot with private equity firms to help them with cybersecurity due diligence. And then in parallel, I've been evaluating senior operating roles like COO, for example, and for my next adventure, which will most likely also be in cybersecurity again.
Very cool. Well, look, you said the three magic letters, which are near and dear to my heart, which is COO. And part of the reason I was really excited for this conversation is I have an affinity for folks who've kind of made that transition. It's been such a it's been such a nice transition and change for me in my career over the last when did I stop lawyering? In 2012, so about 13 years, and all the different flavors that operator role has taken on for me. But let's take it back for you to a little bit of the earlier years of Sachin as the human, not really just the lawyer just yet. What was it like for you? Where did you grow up? Was there anything in your early life that was kind of telling you and tugging you towards lawyering?
Sure. Yeah, I'm the first person in my family to be born in the United States. English was not my first language. Hindi was, and I went from being someone that kids in school made fun of because I didn't pronounce certain English words like they did,
Yeah.
and then fast forward to a number of years later where I was outlapping them in like AP US history and AP English, and British literature was one of my favorite classes. And then over time, of course, I just became phenomenally better at English and much poorer at Hindi. I'm sure I know my parents were still to this day wish my Hindi could be a little bit better, but it's still okay. But I when I reflect back on my early years, I knew very quickly that I was much more of a English, humanities, history type of person, just because of the nature of those classes and my interest in them and excitement for them, versus like the dread and fear and agony when I had like a pop quiz in chemistry class, for example. Um, and the first real book I ever read was The Client by John Grisham, and I was 10 years old,
No
and
kidding. You read
I
that at
was
10.
I don't know if I fully understood it at 10, but I read it, and I thought that courtroom dramas and John Grisham's fiction was just totally fascinating. No one in my family, both my immediate family or extended family, was a lawyer, and I uh, from then on, I think even until present, my my life has been a series of twists and turns. And I thought that I was going to become a lawyer, and then when I went to college, my dad and my brother were both senior business professionals, and so I'm thinking I'm going to go into Wall Street, and I major in economics, and I realized that I am just not as excited about taking statistics and macro and micro econ, and I fell into majoring in government, specifically public policy. And I remember my parents asking me, "Okay, well, so what are you gonna do with that degree?" um, and like good Asian parents do, they're always kind of worried about
Yeah.
what you're actually what are they. I
How are
think
you
the
gonna make
real
money?
question that they
Is this gonna
I
make
think
money? Are you gonna be able to support yourself?
yeah, well, I didn't. They were paying for college, which I was very fortunate that they were able to do that, and I think there was also like that like Asian fear of guilt of like, do we really want to tell our friends that our son is majoring in government or studying government? um, they told me that you don't make a lot of money on Capitol Hill. So I found out that law school was the one of the biggest sort of most popular things that students in my major did. And so now I was back to law school again and thinking
Yeah.
about being a lawyer. And fundamentally, I viewed being a lawyer as solving problems.
Yeah.
And I was really excited about the idea of solving complex problems that would change people's lives. And I think I had a realization that many lawyers do when they graduate from law schools, and I was fortunate to go to Duke and for both undergrad and law school, and then you're now helping very large companies with fundamentally like financial related issues and problems.
Absolutely.
So there was uh, I think I, I would say for anyone who considers going to law school, it's not like a lot of things. It's not a straight line.
Yeah.
Some people take time off. I didn't, and I'm really glad I'm really glad I made the decision to go to law school and to practice for some time.
Yeah. I want to back up for just one second because you told me that you were born here, but Hindi was your first language.
Yeah.
And like, so at what age did you start learning English?
So I learned English while watching soap operas with my mom, who watched General Hospital, which I think is still on the air
It
like
is still
50
on.
years
It
50
is still
years
on.
later. So I learned words like affair, cheating, marriage, like just all these
Yeah.
things that as like a young 4 or 5 year old kid probably just obviously did not understand what a lot of these words meant. But I, I, my parents spoke predominantly Hindi in the household, and that was deliberate to make sure that my brother and I knew kind of our native tongue. And
Yeah.
but then it wasn't until I really started to go to school that I I formally was learning English, other than some of that we were using around the house.
Yeah. It's I have a very similar story of both language, but also soap operas. So I moved to the country in '84. Now, you go to school in India, you learn Hindi and English at the same time. Those are the two dominant languages. But my brother, who was 5 at the time, didn't speak a lick of English because he hadn't started school yet in India.
Oh
So we
wow.
moved here. So my parents switched completely to English at home. And then I watched plenty of soap operas with my mother when we had first moved to the country, especially when I was sick home, from school or whatever. Like I remember those memories vividly. It was also a little bit of my entry into the American culture a little bit. And I remember that, probably first couple of years in Cleveland, Ohio, watching General Hospital. And there was one more that I'm totally blanking on that she absolutely loves.
All
So
My Children, maybe.
it's yeah, something like that, something of that nature. All right, so you go and you become a lawyer, you go into big law. Was there a feeling at the law firms where you're like, yeah, this is not going to be me for long term? Like, what was that telling you?
I loved being so I loved part of what I did at big law firms. You get just phenomenally good training of what it means to service very sophisticated clients on complex matters, uh, and I practiced that at two big law firms here in New York, and then at a boutique law firm for a number of years, also building out their New York office here. I think it was less about the structure of the law firms and more just that I put an enormous amount of pressure on myself that the end all be all was making partner at a firm, and nothing else really mattered. Um and and then I also, as I got more senior in my career, I realized that the one of the true success factors of being at a law firm, and even being a law firm partner, is having a true differentiation and a niche that you're really good at. Because once I became a client, when I was in house at a bank, which was before I was at Security Scorecard, you didn't hire a law firm necessarily. You hired a lawyer to solve a particular
Yeah,
problem for you. So, for example, you might be hiring one of the best, one of the best lawyers to help you on an SEC related inquiry, or you're hiring a lawyer who's done a particular civil litigation in front of that judge before, maybe even clerked for that judge, and so you are hiring specific people for specific issues. And I was self-aware enough to know that I hadn't developed a true superpower niche for myself. I was essentially, what I felt like it was, I was just another one of many litigators. And and that that didn't sit well with me. And I I also just did not I also felt litigation to be very repetitive, um and discovery in particular was
yeah,
just, it drained my energy. I have a very close friend of mine who gets energized and excited, actually a couple friends of mine, who are both partners at firms and just absolutely love taking depositions, and this is something that just gets them really going professionally.
yeah,
And for me, I want to run away.
yeah. I had a case where I think I took about 40 depositions across 4 months. It was a big toxic tort matter. And as much as I liked taking depositions, that was the last year that I ever took depositions in my entire career. So I totally get it. All right, like, is there a little bit of a crisis of conscience here for you, or is there a little bit of a feeling of, oh crap, like I got here, I thought I wanted to make partner. Okay, now what? What am I going to do? Like, was there any of that for you?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was. And I was a senior associate at Paul Hastings actually at the time, and I was on the partner track, and I worked for a partner uh, who had hired me, who had mentored me, and who I felt like was going to be my, proverbial rabbi in the partnership process, because I had heard from a lot of people that you need that sponsor,
Yeah,
you need that rabbi, that person that's going to fight for you in the partnership meetings to get you to be partner, because it's just ultimately, for most firms, it comes down to a numbers game of
yep,
how many they can take, which practice areas, which geographies. And that person um, ended up getting a kind of life-changing opportunity to go rebuild the legal department at Royal Bank of Canada. And she took me with her on a secondment, was the fastest way for me to go in, but the idea was for me to go sort of rebuild their legal function in the US. And so my career has been a series of just unexpected organic changes that I embraced. I'm very big on this concept of just pivoting, right? You have to be able to know when to pivot. Sometimes the pivot kind of happens to you. similar, like in my last role, I was GC, but 6 months after I joined, the pandemic hit, and I worked for a founder and a CEO that sought my help to help him run the business, when it was when because the pandemic required efficient growth, and there were some other executives that were in and out of the business, so I was kind of gap filling, and so my 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 transition from lawyer to operator happened kind of very organically, and it wasn't overnight, but it also wasn't several years. It happened pretty
Yeah.
quickly.
And so, I mean, like, I want to double click on this concept that you just mentioned around pivoting and kind of embracing that and being ready for that. At what point in your career did you realize, A, that's possible, right? Because we work in a profession, you use the word linear. I mean, it is lockstep linear. It's not just linear. It's
Right.
here's your path. You will follow it or you won't. Like there, it's very binary. There's not a lot of zigging and zagging that you can do in that particular path. And I mean the law firm path. And that's the path that was probably most familiar to us as we went into law school,
Right.
was probably the most visible to us as we're coming out of law school. And that's the path that we're on. But you realize that somewhere along the way, not only was it feasible to pivot, but it was necessary. Like, what was that realization like, and how did it come about?
It happened to me at so many different instances in my life. Um, I had an early growth spurt and thought I was going to go play college basketball and maybe even the NBA. And so when I got cut from my high school basketball team, it was, I remember even like where I was sitting in my house when I got the phone call from the coach telling me that I had been cut. And I ended up coding my high school's website. And this was like 1998. And so at that time, that was actually, um, pretty unique thing when almost no high schools had their own websites, let alone, if a college had it, it was very, very basic. And um, when I started practicing as a lawyer, I started the morning after Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy, and so here was me as a newly minted litigation associate, and had avoided bankruptcy during law school,
Yeah.
because I found it boring, to literally being thrown into the fire and helping financial institutions to navigate the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy. And I ended up doing a tremendous amount of bankruptcy litigation, for the early part of my career, because that was just what the the client demand and the need was. And then there was a period of time where there were a number of insider trading cases being brought in, particularly out of the Southern District of New York, and I spent a couple of years, defending an individual who was part of an investigation, and never, thankfully never charged. But none of those things were what I anticipated doing, certainly when I was in law school. Um, and I when I made the deliberate move from financial services into tech, none of us knew that a pandemic would hit, and I would go from being in an office that I had been in for 6 months and just loving that, to being fully remote. And there, Akshay, there's pivots that sound silly, but like like I had been at jobs where there was always a phone on your desk,
Yeah.
and you had a business, like you had a work line,
Yeah.
and you sat at a desk, and people called you on that work line. And I remember at all the firms I worked at, and even at the bank I worked at, um, I I I was always worried that someone would call me and I'd not be at the desk, right? Yeah, people would send an email, but you were always worried about that old school partner
Yeah.
that would call you at like 5 or 6 o'clock, and God forbid you were not at your desk.
Yeah.
And so I remember when I joined my last company, and it's my first day at work, and it's a startup, and first of all, there's no office, right? And as like a lawyer, you always pride yourself on your space and your office, and initially at a law firm, I'm like sharing space, but for the most part, I had my own office, and so I go from having this like beautiful, nice, office with a door or glass door, to sitting like, where where law firm secretaries sat, and all of a sudden I'm 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 thinking to myself, oh my god, what did I get myself into? And why is there not a phone on my desk? And I asked the head of IT, um, and he said, you know, we have a couple of phones, but no one's ever asked for it or used it. And he brought out a phone that looked like it was from the 1980s. And so I told him to immediately, like, it wasn't one of those fancy Avaya looking phones
Yeah.
that now even have, like, I guess, like a little video camera on them and everything.
Yeah.
It looked like something that my parents were using when they moved from India in like the late 70s or early 80s.
Yeah.
And so, um, you know, you have to be prepared for those sorts of, like, look at AI now,
Yeah.
and what that has done to just every industry. And um, I tell anyone who's in school or looking for a job, and I just tell them, I said, like, get yourself to be like amazing at prompting. Figure out a way for you to know AI better than anyone you know. And so, like, that's a pivot, right? You have to be willing to make that pivot, because that's what the kind of world demands, right? It's not, and I mean, we could probably do a separate podcast about the disruption of AI in the legal space, and I'm there are definitely people that are better suited to talk about that issue than me, but I've been all in on AI to a point of obsession, right? Just constantly watching YouTube videos to learn, like, you know, forcing myself to not use Google and to use different open source LLM tools
Yep.
and to use them in a very kind of deep way. But it's the being open minded to pivots is just it's so critical.
Yeah. I think it's probably one of the most necessary skill sets that isn't talked about enough. That ability to absorb information, look at trends, have that curiosity, teach yourself new things. I mean, I don't, this is probably a cliche at this point, but the world really feels like it's changing faster than it ever has before. Like, technology plays a huge role in that. We work in a profession that has not changed very quickly for 150 years.
Right.
And even
Right.
that clip is now picking up speed, and how that's getting transformed in our own profession. And a lot of people who don't start to do these things are actually going to get left behind. I think that's a reality. I think that's a fact. And I think the ability to pivot and teach yourself new skill sets, teach yourself new ways of doing the same role, I think that's what's going to keep you relevant. It's going to keep you energized. It's going to keep you
Hmm.
interested in how you're, not just what you're doing, but how you're doing your work. That's a big part of what I've been in the last 10, 12 years. So I think that continues to happen. And we'll talk a little bit. I have three standard questions that I ask every guest. I just started this a few podcast episodes ago. We'll get to those in a minute, but
Okay,
one of
great.
them is on exactly this subject. But let's get back a little bit to your in-house world. And so you're at this big bank. You decided not to get a phone on your desk. Good choice. By the way,
Well,
I
my
still
startup I did. At my startup
was
I
it,
did. When I was in house at a bank, we
you did.
definitely had a phone. Yeah. Yep. For sure.
I mean, I still remember when I was a paralegal at Latham after college for 3 years. This is right at the peak of the dot-com bubble, and then it burst like 6 months into my tenure, and like things went crazy for the first time in my career, and then it happened again 8 years later. But um, but I remember Blackberries for the lawyers at Latham were like a brand new thing. And I remember walking around the office, and when you would see an associate or a partner walking around, it was the first time. It wasn't with the iPhone. It was they were staring at their little handheld device
Oh
more than they
yeah.
were looking up and walking around and saying hello to people. And they were on that thing like nonstop. And I was fortunate enough at the tail end of my 3 year stint as a paralegal to do a 6 week like massive arbitration, and I was the only paralegal on the case with like six. It was fantastic. And in between the arbitration sessions in our war room, everybody was on their Blackberries checking their email, because that concept of like service and availability that's just like hammered into you in law school and in your associate days, that doesn't go away. I don't
Yeah.
think it changes anything. I wonder
No,
if
and
you.
it was a big deal to even it was a big deal like when you got a BlackBerry,
Yeah.
right? Especially as like a um, because I remember I was a summer associate when they came out, and not all the summer associates got Blackberries because they just didn't have enough Blackberries for all the
Didn't want to
summer
spend the money on them.
associates. No, I well, and I also and it wasn't it was the first time they were being rolled out, so there was like we want to make sure that the associates and partners sort of jive with this before we give
Yeah,
it to the rest of the summer associates and the staff, and because it's there's a hierarchy in law firms, right? There just
absolutely.
totally is, um, and and summer associates, you're almost at the bottom there, pretty much with all the professional staff,
Yeah.
and even though a lot of the professional staff these days is like our former associates from that same firm
Yeah.
or former lawyers,
Yeah.
but I was on an international anti corruption matter and in China actually, and so I had a BlackBerry, and I remember it was just um, it was weirdly exciting, like at the time to have one and to be able to not be you didn't have to be chained to your desk and but uh, it seems so silly and ridiculous now because like people that are 10 years old have a phone, but
That information is readily available. Okay, so minor sidebar because you're a cyber guy.
yeah,
But I remember I was a junior associate. iPhones had kind of started to really come into the kind of the mainstream, and and a lot of firms were struggling with this question. And I remember both at Pillsbury, where I was, but also Farella, there was a there was an extensive conversation that the firm should not issue iPhones to their lawyers because of security issues that did not exist with
and
the
BlackBerry.
BlackBerry. Was that
Yep.
true, Sachin? Like, was that a real thing, or was that just firms holding on to the BlackBerry model?
No, that was a without getting sort of too geeky and nerdy, but that was a real concern because it took some times it took some time for firms to just figure out like can people use because everyone the problem was that individually people weren't buying Blackberries for themselves, they were
Right.
buying iPhones,
Right.
and they had their personal email on their iPhone, and so there was this issue initially of like, well, can people actually bring their own device? Like, can we is what how do we put like a firm email on someone's iPhone? And it just there wasn't the capability that there is today with having these essentially these like closed universe container environments where you can have your corporate your corporate email and other your corporate sort of your corporate documents and other things on your phone. And so the short answer is that it was absolutely like a real security issue, and part of it was just also just there wasn't like the capability and technology to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And so BlackBerry was just the simplest way to have people be able to access their emails securely, and then of course it just evolved from people being able to edit documents or find documents in their document management system as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that change, I was talk about the speed of change, that happened so very quickly. It wasn't even an issue past 2010. Like, I don't even remember it. And then BlackBerry just basically went away. Like, it was gone
Right, right.
because
But
the
then it
iPhone
became
and the
that now
Galaxy
it's
took over.
and I think it's still that question of like, do you carry
Dude.
two devices, keep the church and state quote separate, or do you consolidate and just have one? And
Well, and so I told you my wife is also in cybersecurity, and she is very adamant that you have two devices, one for work and one for personal, because if there's any cross contamination anywhere, you're dead in the water, especially if you house a lot of sensitive information. All right, let's talk a little bit about your transition from lawyering into operator. Like, what was that like? When did it first kind of come across your desk, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, this might actually be far more interesting than the lawyering that I've been doing, and how did that take place?
yeah, it like I said, I mean it happened very organically, and a lot of it was just driven by factors both externally at my company but also internally. So internally, as I was at a hyper growth startup, and when you're growing very fast, there are people that are going to come in and out of your business. for various reasons. And it was also an environment that was hyper competitive, and there were a lot of kind of startups that were trying to poach our talent and vice versa. And so there was definitely like that tech talent war. And then there were also those sort of instances where you found people that were the company kind of outpaced and outgrown them, and you needed to find somebody for the next sort of stage of your journey. And I was, a lot of it was just right place at the right time. I was in an environment where company was growing really rapidly, and in a couple of instances, I needed to fill a gap. So, for example, the in my last company, when the company was in between heads of HR, it was me who ran the HR department. Similarly, the business was in between a chief of staff, and I was going out and literally in the market hiring for one, but for almost a year, the business didn't have one. So it was me on top of my other responsibilities. And I, and part of it was just COVID. Like there was COVID, there's no playbook, there's no precedent. It was just like, how do you exercise really good business judgment, um, in an environment where you have to grow quickly, but you have to grow efficiently, and you can't burn as much cash as you maybe normally would.
Yep.
So it I also just got myself very energized about everything relating to customers, and that was when the sort of the light bulb shifted in my head that like this was going to be the new chapter of my career or the next stage of my growth. Because a, a customer generally doesn't, they don't want to see a lawyer if they're having a lawyer on a call, it's because like there's a red line that
Yeah.
they have to kind of go into. And
Yeah.
I got more excited about revenue than red lines.
Yeah.
That and instead of being the advisor to the business, I loved being the operator of the business.
Yeah.
And and you definitely you stop kind of operating in risks and hypotheticals, because when you have a P&L, it's very black and white of, are you hitting the numbers or not? Are you, how all your decisions and what you're doing, how are you like really moving the business forward, and not just like in a very outcome driven way. And so that it it was uh, it was unique to the circumstances I was involved in, and I was really fortunate that I worked for an amazing CEO who supported that growth for me as well. Because you have to be, you might have great operational sort of chops or desires or interests, but if are working in an environment where you're always just going to be seen as a lawyer, and you're going to be kind of put in that box no matter what, then that may not be the environment that's gonna where you're gonna make that jump. Um, so I I'm very really really grateful for just the support I had to be able to do it. And
Yeah.
firing myself as the GC was definitely one of the best moves I ever made.
Did you actually send yourself a letter or
Um,
record it in board minutes somewhere? I'm sure.
I I will never forget the phone call I made to the number two person on the legal team when I told
Yeah.
him that it was he was now the general counsel of the company. Because it was a sense of I had a bit of a relief that I wasn't carrying the title anymore, because I worked for a company where my CEO kind of, I think rightfully just believed that you needed to be in the role for quite a while doing it before you got the title change and the compensation change. So I held the general counsel title for quite a while, where I was really in an operational role. I was in front of customers. I was
Yep.
dealing with, most of my job had become very non-legal, and was fortunate to have built up a couple people in the legal team who were really strong. And so, um, but I'll never forget that call I made, and I knew that it changed his life, because that was a goal for him. And he's now a general counsel at another startup, but he stayed where I was for 3 or 4 years after that. Um, but it created capacity for me to be able to take on a lot of go-to-market work, operations. I built a public sector business, and my parents were like a little confused because they were like, we paid for law school and you gave the job away.
I think there's a special kind of flex that kids of Indian parents have when they confuse the living shit out of their parents with their career choices and they end up so successful and happy. Like I just think there's a special kind of flex for us in that particular respect.
I had a COO role that we called it chief business officer for a few reasons, but it was fun. It was functionally a COO role, but until I became president at my last company, uh, my parents would tell, and I love them dearly, but they would tell our family in India and my friends that I was the company's lawyer, and I had stopped being the company's lawyer like years prior to that, and I got to a point where I stopped correcting them, um, and it but when people reach out to you and ask for legal advice,
Yeah.
it's like you kind of have to
Yeah.
sort of give them the like, hey, I'm sure this happened to you too, Akshay, but like you have to tell them like, well, I stopped practicing a long time ago, but I'm happy to find you somebody that can that can help. And then of course you have some people that that go to themselves, wait, I have to pay for advice. I need to pay for help. Like, I thought you're just gonna
Wait,
like text me
you
back.
give it to me for free. Why not?
Yeah.
Um,
Now they can just ask ChatGPT or something,
yes,
and so they
indeed.
maybe just leave you
They should.
alone. But
They often do. Yeah. Um, you used the term business judgment just a little while ago, and in my work with lawyers after my law firm years, during my Axiom tenure, I probably interviewed and worked with close to 1,000 lawyers in that seven-year period,
it's a lot of
and
lawyers to work
and
with.
one of yeah, one of the biggest um, one of the biggest signals that we used to look for and who we brought on to into the Axiom fold to service our clients was, will this person have the right kind of business judgment? And that's not inherent to many lawyers. Talk to us a little bit about like where did that come from for you? Did you feel like it was one of those situations where like I tapped into something that was always there, or was it something that I really wanted to have and I worked on honing that skill set and at the right time I was able to pivot and use it? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point, right? That when someone says business judgment and that phrase gets used a lot, like what does that really mean, and how do you get that skill? And I uh, I think a lot of lawyers underestimate their ability to have and exercise business judgment, whether they're doing that in the capacity of being a lawyer or whether they're doing that like as you and I are as operators, because they're confusing identity of being a lawyer with their capability. Um, Having the legal training and then practicing in any type of legal environment gives you a significant amount of transferable skills. Um, it makes you excellent at communications, which is super important for exercising business judgment. It gives you great ability to communicate clearly, both in written and in oral form. You operate as a lawyer with imperfect information or incomplete information, and that's another way of saying you operate with. That's what leaders do,
Yeah.
and I don't think lawyers lack these skills of communications and being able to have imperfect information, having analytical abilities as well. It's that they it's a mindset. As a lawyer, are you're seeking permission, right? You need that sign off. You need that CEO or that board or CFO, because you're in an advisor role. And I think once you unlock the mindset that you don't when you're an operator, like you don't need the permission. In fact, you want to, if you are seeking that, it's just going to slow you down. Um, and 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 so when you reframe that, I'm no longer an advisor, I'm now an owner of this business. I'm a shareholder of this business, that's when you change, and that's how you get those that business judgment. Now, having said all of that, uh, no question, I had to do a lot of uh, of like what I would call accelerated learning, and I would have done it regardless of whether I had the legal training or not. I
Yeah.
think everybody, you always want to be trying to grow and find ways of learning beyond the training that's provided at your job. And so I did this in two ways. First is I consumed a lot of books, and I probably read more books in my last role than I read um, in all my previous jobs combined. In fact, I would
Okay.
joke with my CEO. I said, like, you're making me feel like it's law school again, because there's a new book that shows up, every single week from Amazon at my apartment, and um, but it helped me tremendously. Like um, there's a great book by Chris Voss, who's a former FBI hostage negotiator, and he wrote it's called Never Split the Difference.
Never
Um,
split the difference.
Never Split the Difference. It's all about negotiation, which whether you're a lawyer or you're in a business, like in any role, you're always. I mean, those of us who are married, it's the you're
Or parents.
negotiating.
Or parents. My gosh.
Parent. Oh yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah, but you're a parent as well. So that is amazing. There's another book that I loved, and it's called The Secret Lives of Customers, and it is by
I'm
David
writing
Duncan.
it
I
down,
just
by
want
the
to make
way.
sure I have his last name correct. And I love that book. It's all about how you think about customers from a perspective of like, what job do you want them to do? Like, it's called Jobs to Be Done, and the whole book is actually written like a fictional. There's a whole fictional story of a coffee chain that's about to IPO, but they're having difficulty, and so they call it a market detective instead of like a police detective.
Yeah.
And it teaches you that people don't necessarily go to a coffee shop because they want a cup of coffee. Some of people are looking to have a place where they can meet other people and form a community or get their homework done, and so I super recommend that one. And the third, and I'll stop with the book recommendations, I
No, I
promise,
love
but
it. Yeah.
is a book called Amp It Up. It's by Frank Slootman.
I see it back
He
on your bookshelf right there.
it's I mean, I'm at this point I'm almost quoting from the book, but it's all about how do you increase urgency and speed in um, in a business setting. Um, and it's I had when you're a lawyer, your speed and velocity is not necessarily skills that you automatically think about, right? So when I talked about the mindset change, part of some of the things that I learned from my accelerated learning journey was um, you there's decision speed and velocity, and you have to, when you're, especially if when you're the when you're the son of Indian immigrants, like, that even getting an A- is a bad thing. But so when you're in a legal environment, oftentimes you have the bandwidth and the runway to be able to sort of get things to almost a point of perfection.
Perfection.
Um,
Absolutely.
but like when you're, especially when you're growing a company and you're, any startup, the moat is oftentimes just speed. How fast do they move? And you have to be okay with most things being like a B-.
Yeah.
And that's what books like Amp It Up really teach you. And then um, actually, I don't know if you've done this in your operating career, but I got myself a couple executive coaching, and I've had, I'll use a coach for a year or two, and then I'll move to a different coach just so I get a different perspective. But I've had three really good coaches who've taught me everything from just go to market to branding to how to use like psychology and organizational psychology to um, to like improve your own performance, and then the performance of others around you. Uh, and so I mean the world's best, take any tennis player.
Yep.
They've got multiple coaches, right? Someone to help them with
Absolutely.
their backhand and their forehand, and so I couldn't recommend sort of exec coaching more highly enough, whether
Totally.
you're in a legal role or another role.
Yeah. Yeah. No, one of the first things I did when I took this role was I joined a community for CXOs. We meet monthly, both as a group. So there are a variety of kind of perspectives at the table, but I also get plenty of one-on-one coaching, and it has been instrumental in my own journey over the last 2 years as COO at the company. It's been huge. Um, let's pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about legal technology. Um,
Sure.
has been there in the law firm world for a while. I mean, it did eDiscovery. There's been those kinds of things. Although I still remember when email was like a brand new thing into that world.
Yeah.
But it is now a critical part of the infrastructure in the in-house world, including cyber, which is near and dear to your heart. Tell us a little bit about kind of how the role of legal technology has evolved for you, and obviously we want to transition that, into what AI looks like for lawyers of today.
Yeah. So, like you said, like legal technology has moved from, in my experience, just like these clunky e-discovery tools that help you with massive amounts of uh, of of discovery and documents to um, enabling legal teams that are stretched. And I don't think I've ever spoken to a GC that tells me, yeah, I've got tons of people on my team. I've got tons of tools. Like we've got more than enough. Like you're always you're always, if you're in any kind of what's called like G&A role, like legal, finance, HR, you're always going to operate a little bit more leaner, or you should ideally be operating a little bit more leaner than you want to be, because I know the phrase cost center gets used a lot, but just I think understanding that your um, it is non-revenue generating, and that your job is to really actually you're instead of cost center, I would say like you're a revenue enablement,
Yeah,
and um, and 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 getting the technology that can help you with whether it's contract red lines, or file management, contract management systems, and now certainly various kind of AI tools that are there. Um, it will it will get you. It will bring you velocity with your business partners that you need. And in my experience, it the my GC and his team would evaluate these types of tools on a regular basis, and I think without them, just the the team would have been more slow and had to absorb more headcount, and so I think that the space has just now evolved so rapidly that it seems almost like that the in-house and the kind of company side are outpacing the innovation that's happening maybe at the law firms, right? It's like what you were talking about earlier, where like there's been such a step change, but
yeah,
is that happening inside of law firms that might be doing the same thing that they've been doing for many years?
yeah. I mean, look, change is either forced or it comes from the realization of this monumental incentive that can be realized on the back end of that change. And law firms have neither pushing them in that direction. They're not being forced really just yet, even from customers and clients, because that's really where the forcing mechanism will come from. It's not going to come from anywhere else. Clients will either tell them, you will do this or else, and then that change will take place. I've been through plenty of that in my career, in terms of kind of forcing that change. The other is the incentive structure. what incentives do law firms have in an age of, what was Kirkland's revenue last year? 8 billion, 9 billion, something like that, right? So they're making a lot of money.
Sounds
The
like I should go
incentive
work for
is
Kirkland.
money. Yeah. Their profits per partner were astronomical. We'll see what they are this year. But where's the incentive? They actually have a disincentive to change, because when you change the model to create efficiency under their current model, under the current economic model, efficiency is not necessarily offset with volume immediately in terms of revenue. So if you're creating more efficient revenue, that generally means lower revenue, less cost to the client, which is great for clients and what it should be, but it means less revenue for the law firm. And the way to offset that kind of reduction in revenue from a particular customer or client is to add in more customers and clients. Well, that's not going to
Mhm.
happen very easily, because many of these firms have customers and clients that have been with them forever, and that's the change in market share is not quite as easy to realize. So both of those do not exist in the reality for law firms. So yeah, I think the innovation that we're talking about there is coming from two areas. One is the in-house world. One is the in-house world because both of those forcing mechanisms are there. CFOs, COOs, CEOs are telling GCs, you're not getting as much money as you were last year. In fact, you're getting less. Oh, and by the way, we're quadrupling the amount of legal work that you need to get done through the legal department. So that's one incentive. Like, you have to do it. That happened shortly after the financial crisis in 2008. It has continued now. The other is they're actually getting more sophisticated. Legal departments are getting more sophisticated. They are starting to realize that if I pull these 3 or 4 different work streams in house and I put a P&L to it, my OPEX for that P&L in a year or 2 years is going to be far more effective from a work product and output perspective, but also from a cost perspective, than if I had continued to send this to outside counsel or anywhere else outside my walls, right? So you have the makings of this dynamic on the in-house side. Legal technology is now central and core to that principle and to those principles. Now, let's add in AI to all of this. Like, how does that accelerate or obliterate this entire ecosystem in your mind? And we don't need to be AI experts to talk about this, because we deal with it plenty on our daily basis.
I think either with or without the AI piece, fundamentally, you're still talking about the tech, the SaaS software,
Yeah.
and that is supposed to do, whether you're talking about legal tech or in any other industry, it's supposed to do one or more of four things: save, number one, time, save time; number two, save cost; number three, reduce risk; and number four, produce revenue. Um, and legal tech, similar to security technology, um, it it saves time and it saves money. Now, in the case of security technology, you're also saving risk.
Yep.
But so then for legal tech, now you have AI kind of layered into it. It's gonna save even more time, and hopefully also will save more money and save more
Yeah.
costs,
Yeah.
which there's definitely a lot of fear and concern about AI. How's it gonna how's it gonna affect headcount? And my general thesis is that it's augmenting. Um, there's got to be a human in the loop. Uh, I I spoke to a brilliant operator and investor. His name is John Sakota. He runs a firm called Decibel, and he said to me the other day, he said, "Look, Sachin, until AI gives us goosebumps,
Yeah.
it's not like we're not going anywhere, right? Like, so you need that human in the loop, because you have to build trust, and um, and especially in a world like of legal tech and the type of issues that you're dealing with, like, you have to have that trust.
Yeah.
So I think that the faster a legal department can you don't want to be using AI driven or AI native or AI powered tech for the sake of being able to tell a CFO or someone else, like, hey, I'm using AI in my department. I'm like
Yeah.
checking this box. And I know at a
Yeah.
lot of companies, there was these mandates. I think you want to be thinking about it from an outcome driven perspective, right? In your example, it's if you have less budget than last year, but you know that your
Absolutely.
workload has increased. Well,
Yep.
is there AI technology that's going to allow you to get things to get more things done, to be able to get things done faster,
Yeah.
and if you can actually show an ROI out of that, and ideally your the vendors that you're hiring, you can really partner with you to help you do that.
Absolutely.
That which I'm sure you all are doing, and you're
We are indeed.
leading the charge on that.
Yeah.
Um, then that's where you also differentiate yourselves from other other competitors in the space, who aren't. I would say that because I came from I guess I'll kind of maybe, I know we're getting close on time, but I instead of being a vendor, be a partner. That's when I would have customers call me as and describe me as a partner to them and their team. Like that's when I knew that's when I knew that we had unlocked a new part of the relationship, and I knew that growing that relationship, expanding it, um, it was gonna be a lot smoother, and because being seen as a partner, and not just like
Yeah.
another one of their many vendors.
Yeah. Hopefully you're going beyond the sale into that trusted advisor to really kind of solve the issue. Most of our customers are our legal departments in house, and there's so much that goes on with them that has nothing to do with our tool that we're able to support, just of the way because of the way that we approach that conversation. The ROI piece that you mentioned is so critical. I mean, any CEO or CFO worth his or her salt cannot take the yes, we're using AI in our department at face value without seeing at least two slides that show a before and after picture, and like, here's what we anticipate, and we'll measure it over these 2 quarters, and then we'll show you the proof in the pudding. Maybe it's working, maybe it's not, but we think it will, and here's why we think it will work. And then actually being able to show that. I really liked your 4 points. I've had a holy trifecta for legal technology and legal operations. And as you were saying that, I almost wanted to scream, like, wow, that's the first time that I've had a conversation with anyone around this topic, and they've actually, without, I know we prepped for this, but we didn't talk about this issue, actually said exactly what I say, which is legal technology should reduce time, reduce cost, and reduce risk. I do think it reduces risk. If
You're
you get
right. It
caught,
should reduce also risk too, for
if
sure,
you
to
have
the
insight
organization.
into termination dates and renewal dates and
Right.
things like that, these things very basic, it actually reduces risk for the company. The one that I'm going to start adding now, which I don't think I think about enough, or at least I don't articulate enough, is it should accelerate revenue. And I always think it's the same side of the coin of reducing cost. It's not. It's a very different thing. So I'm going to start adding that to my, well, I can't call it a holy trifecta anymore. I have to think of a different word, a different term.
Yeah, I mean, that's how can you, like, as a perfect example, it would be your contracts don't have a price increase
Yep.
built into them. You don't have an auto increase provision in there.
Yeah.
That's like a perfect example. Or another is you flag the fact that uh, you're not you don't you're not giving multi-year deals, right? And so how do you enable your contracts and the way you approach that to incentivize customers to sign up for multi-year deals, right? Or it
Yeah.
makes you're making termination too easy, and you're not providing for for something that's a little bit more sticky. So those are the types of examples that, and I think this is where like the partnership with the business is really really important um, to to have that dialogue with your sales leader to say like, hey, what are some things that we can maybe put in our agreements that will help us um, to capture some of that revenue. And sometimes there's also, I got feedback, for example, that um, that the business really wanted to make sure, this was when I was on the legal side, the business really wanted to make sure that there was provisions about how we could use a customer logo.
Yeah.
Um, in the agreement. And I my response was, I hear you, but it's one of the most frequently redlined things out of the contract. And now all of a sudden, and then or not only is it going to get taken out, but you're going to have language put in there by the customer that's going to say that we require explicit permission before you
Express.
put our logo on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I coach the business on saying, don't put anything about publicity or logo usage in an agreement, because sometimes you can then operate in a world of ask for forgiveness as opposed to asking for permission.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you might have that slide that you're using in a customer meeting, and it's got some customer logos on it, and well, your agreement was silent on the use of that, and for those logos, and it becomes a much easier exercise to add some logos that that other customer will find meaningful. They might be logos of their of in their industry, especially. So that's where you have to be thinking. I know that that's kind of a mantra, is like, how do you go from being advisor to business enabler? But that's like a very specific, concrete example of how to do that.
Agreed. 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 All right. I promised you that I would ask 3 questions towards the end of our conversation that I ask every guest. So, ready for those?
Yes.
All right.
Ready.
The first question is, looking back and reminding yourself of your law school years, what is one piece of advice with the benefit of hindsight that you would give your, let's say, 2 or 3L year self?
I would have uh, taken at least one or two classes that I knew were outside of my core interest areas, um, and done and done that. So I wish. So A, I wish I did that, and B, I really wish I, in hindsight, would have done the combined MBA program. I think
Ah,
that I really think that I think that every lawyer should. I think that every lawyer, everybody who's getting a JD should get an MBA as well, unless you are,
I love that.
110% certain that you
Yeah.
never don't
No,
think you
I
could
love
do it.
that
But
piece of
it
advice.
removes that, oh, you don't have an MBA sort of objection, for your future. Future proofs you.
Okay. So, fast forwarding to law students of today, would your advice change to them at all, or would it stay the same? Sounds like the MBA piece would stay the same.
The MBA piece would stay the same, and the other piece I would add is, um, find a way to get some AI training, whether it's at the school or on your own. I've read that some schools are literally, undergrads can like major in AI now. Um, so I would find a way to understand AI very deeply. Um, however you can at the school, ideally.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. The last one, as you look 10 years from now, Sachin, and you're able to look back, what kind of path do you hope you've taken from where you currently are?
So I hope my path involves less broken bones, literally, since I'm recovering from tearing my ACL. I like to joke that cyber is a contact sport, but no, that it actually was from basketball.
Yeah.
Um, I'm hoping that I've progressed as an operator in different senior roles. As COO, perhaps as CEO. I'm not as fixated on which titles have I had and so forth. Or um, I I hope that I hope that I can point to some specific achievements, like perhaps maybe I've gone through the process of taking a company public, for example, or I've I've been involved in a sale of the company, or maybe it's doing a very transform. I've done M&A, but maybe it's doing some different types of M&A as well. And I think that those things professionally would certainly excite me, and I and there's areas of my professional career, particularly in product and technology, that I want to broaden myself on, and so whereas I post legal kind of has been a lot of go to market and operations and strategy, and so I want to have um, a holistic kind of arc to my career, and so I hope I can reflect and say that I've had more of an impact in those areas. So it's more about just like personal impact in my career growth than
Yeah.
like, you
Title.
know,
Yeah.
I got this specific role or title.
Cool. All right. For any listeners that want to get in touch with you, Sachin, what's the best way? LinkedIn?
LinkedIn. My email is Sachin at techoperator.co. Again, Sachin at techoperator.co. So please feel free to drop me an email or send me a LinkedIn message. My LinkedIn is just, if you look up Sachin S. Bansal, there's this other Sachin Bansal who's like a billionaire in India. Um, who started Flipkart, like the Amazon of India, and I wish I could say that I am him, but I'm a few billion short from where he is right now.
Yeah, he's actually an advisor to Spot Draft, if you would believe it, as you can imagine. Benny
Yeah.
Bunsell. Yeah. All right, Sachin, thanks so much, man. That was a great conversation. I appreciate you taking the time with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks for having me.